Hey, good afternoon on the East Coast, that is. If you listen from the West Coast, good morning. As you can see, I'm coming to you from the red couch. I was celebrating my the receiving of my red couch last week, so now I get to do lives from my red couch. Today, this is actually a conversation that I have been talking about having for quite some time. And when I do these lives, a lot of times I have topics that I want to talk about, and I have this list of things that I want to share with you all, right? Like there's just so many great conversations that I have on a day-to-day basis that are relevant to all of the things that I stand for, that I live, and that I think are important conversations that are not always being had, right? I love deep and meaningful conversation. And so the conversation that has been coming up very often is the conversation about code switching. And I've been saying for just weeks that I want to talk about code switching, and the nature of this conversation. This is a conversation that I've been wanting to have, not only as a live, but probably this is something that I'll have in the clubhouse, conversation I have in the clubhouse, conversation I have on my podcast. For those of you who follow, you know that I have a new podcast, Remap Your Mind. So, I love having these kinds of conversations because they're real conversations, and they are, code switching, CODE. It is a thing that is prevalent in the Black community. We talk about it often, or we talk about it more often in our community, and yet it is something that is probably universal, but not as a compensatory mechanism. So let's talk about, first of all, for those who don't know, what code switching is. And I mean, I know I'm talking to a variety of people who will be listening to this, but some of you already know what code switching is. It's when we have one way of speaking, being, acting in one environment, for various reasons that I'll talk about in a moment. And then we have another way of speaking, being, acting, in another environment, as a compensatory mechanism or for a specific purpose. Now, I'm not talking about necessarily being fake. I'm talking about actual different real versions of ourselves, right? So it's not about pretending to be a certain way. It's about modifying, it's about behavior flexibility, modifying the way one occurs to another, so that you are perceived in a particular way. So it's not so much as a fakeness as it is a compensatory mechanism, or it has been a compensatory mechanism in our community, right? So how there's language that has really just recently, meaning in the last several years, been put to it, but it's something that has been happening, and for Black people specifically, Black and brown people, we sort of were born into this, being able to do this, right? Or you learn early in life how to do this. And so I'll share specifically, I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, and went to a predominantly white school. And so of course in that condition, you typically will have a range of friends. Like I know I had a range of friends. I had Black friends, and I had white friends, and I had, everything in between. And what happens is that you begin to acquire different ways of speaking when you're around, white friends versus when you're around your Black friends. And so you learn this skill. And I know as Black people and probably other, Latinx and maybe other brown and indigenous people learn this as well, but I can speak specifically for Black people. This is something that we learn early on, especially if you grow up in a sort of like primarily dominantly white culture or white area, then you sort of learn the skill. And so I took that along with me, to college, to medical school, and what it really shows up is as a professional, right? So when I'm with my colleagues, white colleagues, white male colleagues, white female colleagues, or just colleagues in general, sometimes even black colleagues, depending on the environment, you learn to present yourself in a particular way, and it wouldn't be the same way that you would, you might could let your hair down a little bit when you're with your girlfriends. Now, some people may say, well, that's normal. It is, it can be normal. But when it causes the way it comes about is, I think for black people, is that it's a form of self-suppression. It's a form of self-suppression, because we are assumed, to, number one, in our culture, there's an assumption that maybe we can't speak well, or maybe we're not as educated, or maybe we have, there's been these assumptions. Now, I'll just sort of sidebar for a moment. Many of you who follow me know that I do anti-racism trainings, and yesterday we did our first half day, or our first day of a 2-half-day training with an organization. And I talked about this. We talked about the culture, the symptoms of white supremacy culture, the characteristics of white supremacy culture. And inside of that is there's only one right way. That's one of the characteristics. And there are a few others as well, right to comfort. There's paternalism. There's so many more that you could read about. But inside of that, this idea of code switching came up because these are the things that black people have to think about that white people don't have to think about, right? And I'm speaking as a black woman. I know that there's other cultures, we call them BIPOC, black, indigenous people of color, have to think about that white people don't have to think about doing. And one of those things is, when you are a black person growing up, a black female, black male growing up, you're automatically told that you have to work 5 times, 10 times as hard to be seen as half as equal. And we're often told you need to make sure you can speak well, speak articulately. Even if you grow up in a household where that's there's no accent per se, right? In different parts of the United States and different parts of the world, there are different dialects and accents. In black people, there's this tendency to feel like we need to speak with less of an accent, speak with less of any kind of dialect, to be able to speak what I'm going to put in quotes as proper, because who made that up, right? That is one of the characteristics of white supremacy. Like, who makes this stuff up? That we cannot be ourselves and speak authentically. We have to meld ourselves into what the dominant culture's accent or lack of accent is. And that is, in our community, how we learn to code switch. It's not that we learn it as a compensatory mechanism. as a skill, as a behavioral flexibility skill to be used intentionally. It's something that we sort of, we get brought up in. Linguistic compliance. That is a beautiful word. I love that beautiful phrase, linguistic compliance. And that's exactly what it is. And so that's how it comes to be, right? And as I've trained in NLP, as I've trained in these sort of the discipline of language, I've come to look at it differently. Like, one of the things I always ask, if you follow me, I ask this question, are you using something? Are you utilizing something? Are you being used by it, right? And so when you gain a skill like this, it is a skill. We don't often see it that way. We don't often see like code switching as a skill that we can actually utilize in different aspects, in different areas. But we see it, we just do it. It's just automatic, an automatic way of being. So then what if, yes, different is not deficient. I love that. What if you saw code switching as behavioral flexibility? I mentioned that earlier. And I talk about this a lot. I love the term behavioral flexibility because it gives us that empowerment to know that we can communicate and connect in any situation, in any circumstance, right? So while in the past it may have been a form of self-suppression, we can begin to look at code switching differently and look at it not so much as a compliance, but as a linguistic flexibility that we now have and can use in our situations to connect, to negotiate, to influence, right? To get where we need to go, what we want in life. And so I think that it's important as we look at the skills that we have that have been acquired through feelings of deficiency, through sometimes force, through oppressive nature, or oppressive culture. We begin to look at and realize that some of those skills that have given us resilience, because that's essentially what is happening here, is that when we acquire these different skills as a result of being inside of an oppressive culture, we're gaining resilience. We're gaining this flexibility, which is one of the reasons why Black and brown people are so resilient. Black people specifically, is because we have had to find loophole is not the word I want to use. Find different pathways to get to the goals that we want to. Let me give you an example. When you have an injury in the body, let's say one has in heart disease, when a blood vessel in the heart starts to narrow and there starts to be blockage, so that the heart, before the heart actually has what we call a heart attack or an infarction, or the blood stops flowing to a part of that heart, as a compensatory mechanism, the heart will develop other what we call tributary blood vessels to source that muscle, right? So that the blood continues to flow. The body adapts to the lack of blood flow to the heart by creating new pathways. And that's essentially what we do when there are certain pathways that continue to be blocked culturally as a culture for us to expand and elevate and grow. We create new pathways to be able to rise and be resilient inside of that oppressive culture. So now what we can begin to do is recognize these compensations as skills. And I would love if you were to after this, go inside yourself, go maybe even journal and really write down I love that. What are all the skills that you think are natural to you? If you were to look at other people, what are all the skills that you've acquired as a result of any type of oppressive situation, whether it's, from a parental standpoint, culturally speaking, whatever that looks like. What are all the skills that you've acquired? And begin to look at that as the flexibility and the resilience that you are. And then how can you now begin to take those skills and utilize them to further what it is that you're up to in the world? What is the difference you want to make? Where do you want to go in life? How do you want to pass this down to your kids in an empowering way? Like, what are those things? I think it really is important. Being culturally bilingual is an incredibly useful tool in business. Absolutely it is. Absolutely. I see that all the time. If you want a wide range of clients, then you might consider that code switching is very useful. And what are the other ways that you can expand the skill of code switching? I'll give you an example. One of the things about me that I've noticed over the years and that I've been told is that now I'm from Huntsville, Alabama, right? I grew up in the South. Probably most of you don't hear that accent in me right now, but I can get it. But what happens is, my dad's family's from New York. They're all up in the Northeast. My dad lives in Rhode Island. My mom's family's from Oklahoma, but I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, and I also have Jamaican heritage as well. So when I get around and I hang around a lot of people from New York too, by the way. When I get around my New York family, I will start to, and it's really kind of inherent, it's not on purpose, I will start to veer into that East Coast New York accent. When I am with my, Southern people, if I'm letting my hair down, or if I'm just, sometimes it's just with regular folk, that Alabama accent will come out. If I'm with my Caribbean friends, I often will notice that the way I pronounce things, I notice it myself now, I used to not, that I will start to pick up this Caribbean accent. And, it's so on and so forth. And so now as I've noticed it, I just allow myself to do it. I allow myself to do it consciously, right? So that, it's just a way of gaining rapport. It's a way of creating rapport between people. And that is very important in any area of life, whether you're connecting in relationships, whether you're connecting in business, whether you're negotiating in corporate, whether it's employee to employee or employer to employee, right? Whatever the case may be, if you're having workers come, and service people, accountants, lawyers, contractors, whatever, it's important to be able to connect with people. And you do that by being behaviorally flexible. And I'm going to reemphasize that behavioral flexibility is not the same as pretense. It's not the same as being fake. It's just allowing yourself to match into, and connect into another person's way of, another person's energies. That's what I want to say. Another person's energies, right? So you can still 100% be yourself. Like sometimes I'll be with my Caribbean friends and maybe I'll pick up a little Caribbean accent, but then, something will be said and then all of my Alabama will come out, right? Same thing with my New York people, with my cousins, and, something will happen. All of my Huntsville, Alabama will come out. And so I think it's important that we do be authentic, but then we notice that there is that skill that we have inside of us to be able to connect with people by matching their energies in whatever way that looks like. So yeah, for many people it's subconscious, and specifically for a lot of Black people it's subconscious because it's something we've learned and acquired even as children. We've acquired it, right? So, as older children. So yeah, that's really what I wanted to share is to begin to look at, code switching as a skill. Look at code switching as a skill, as a form of behavior flexibility that really can be used to create connection with people, that, can be used in business, that can be used in negotiations, in every area that can even be used with your kids, right? I'm a parent, so I'm always going to bring the kid factor in there. So so I'd love to hear from you. I always love the comments, and I've loved the comments today. I've loved the engagement today. I would love to hear from you. What are your takeaways? What are you going to, like, if you go and you look at some other behaviors that you've picked up that's created resilience in you, what are those other behaviors? I think code switching, we talk about it in terms of language, like verbal language, and getting a bank loan. That is true. In terms of language, like verbal language, but also body language. Body language is important in terms of facial expression, in terms of, these are all of the different ways that we represent ourselves in communication. 7% of communication is words. That's it. 7% of communication is words. And while it's very important to be intentional about how you use those words, but the rest of it is tone of voice, it's volume, it's cadence, it's timbre, it's, the vocal variety, it's facial expression, it's all of those things. Hand movements, gestures, you see, I'm a hand talker, right? It's all of those things that make us who we are as communicators. And so I think it's important that we begin to honor that. I tone down my body language while speaking to certain people so as not to offend or scare them. I got that, right? And I think that when you're in certain environments, especially culturally speaking, and you know that there are certain cultural, and I'm talking culture like outside of European culture, like sometimes in specific Asian cultures, like there's a look to talk rule, or in specific Middle Eastern cultures or Eastern European cultures. I don't know. Look to talk rules or don't look to talk rules apply. And knowing that is important, because then you can respect many cultural tradition as well. But in terms of toning down body language, knowing and being intentional about it rather than doing it as a reaction to what if they, not being yourself, suppression, self-suppression, doing it as a response or in self-suppression. I think that's important to distinguish and to be intentional about. So I think that's a really great point there. Yes, I'm very animated as well. That's right. And so when you become okay with who you are, then people, and you're comfortable in your skin, however you are. I am very animated. I am very, I can be very big, and then I embrace that bigness, and it actually attracts people to me, in a way of, people enjoy that energy more than you might think. And it also is in the way, I speak and I'm intentional with my words and things of that nature. So I think that we have to practice intentionality with communication and bring that intentionality to our authentic expression. And then that is where we begin to have that type of flexibility that really brings results in our lives. So that is all. I know I said that's it for 5 minutes ago, but that really is all today. Thank you all for joining me. Of course, you all know that that all of this stuff that I talk about has some grounding in what I teach in neurolinguistic programming and hypnosis and the deep work that I do. So if you want to learn the skills of language at the unconscious level, like beyond the words, in the nonverbal and the unconscious, then you can definitely go to the link in my website that takes you to my website. You can go to remapmymind.com and see all of the programs that we have coming up. And if you feel like you need to do personal work, deep work, just to be more confident in your own expression and be more confident in who you are, so that your expression is authentically you and you feel good inside of that, you don't feel suppressed or oppressed, then feel free to reach out to me personally, or you can go to remapmymind.today and you can book a call with me directly. So thanks for joining me today. I love having these talks, and look out for our episodes of Remap Your Mind. That's the podcast. Look out for those episodes coming out. I'll be posting them in my stories and in my timeline, and we'll be having more of these kinds of conversations. So I appreciate you joining us. You guys have a rest of the day, a great rest of the day. I want to say to those people who are in the Midwest and in Texas, I pray that you all are safe. I hope that, we see that you all see power soon. Stay warm and safe, and I will see you all next week on my next live. Peace.